Well, this hasn't happened before. We are joined probably for a broadcasting first in the City AM studio, certainly. We have the Prime Minister, we have the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and we have the Business Secretary of, I'm pleased to say, the Sir David Amess Children's Parliament. And they're no less impressive for that. So I welcome all three of you to City AM. Could you introduce yourselves, tell us your name, and indeed your job in the Cabinet?
Well, I'm Aryan Shaker and I'm the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I'm Naila Sita and I'm the Prime Minister.
I'm Johnny Liu and I'm the Business Secretary.
And there you have it. Well, I think today you're going to ask me questions. I'm going to do my best to answer questions about finance, about the City of London, maybe about City AM, and also about financial literacy and the economy. And I might ask you some questions as well, because I'm sure you didn't get to the top of politics into the Cabinet without knowing a thing or two as well. So we'll make it a conversation, I'm sure. But Chancellor, you have an introduction for us.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Aryan Shaker and I'm the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And it is an honour to be part of the Sir David Amess's UK Children's Parliament. I have with me today Naila Sita, the Prime Minister, and Johnny Liu, the Secretary for Business and Trade. Together, we form the top team of the UK Children's Parliament. It is our mission today to explain the most complex financial instruments to every child in the UK. And we will quiz Mr. Christian May on these complex topics. And I hope he can answer well. Let us start.
Crikey. All right. Ready when you are.
How do different financial instruments, i.e. equities, debt securities, ETFs, mutual funds, affect the flow of money in the economy, and why would they seem so sophisticated to laymen?
Well, that is, by some way, one of the most interesting questions that I've been asked for quite a long time. You're asking about different financial instruments. And what we mean by that, I suppose, are all the different products and services that make up what we refer to as the City of London, which is the beating heart of the financial infrastructure of the British economy, but it spreads out far and wide across the country. It's one of the biggest parts of the whole British economy. It employs millions of people and it manages an extraordinary amount of money, and some of the ways it manages that money you've just referred to. So it could be something as simple as a savings account, which I'm sure most of us have, if not all of us have, all the way through to some of the most complicated instruments that very few people actually understand and that somehow some people make quite a lot of money out of. So some of the more common ones, for example, we've mentioned a savings account. Obviously, you can have your current account, your bank account, you have a savings account. The government will support some people in different ways of saving money in things like ISAs and junior ISAs, which is a way of saving money without having to pay tax on it. Now, you haven't directly started paying taxes yet, I'm sure. You'll form strong opinions on that when you do, and you can come back and we can talk about tax. In financial services, in the banking sector, there are all sorts of other products as well. So you talked about stocks and shares. Well, I'm sure you know the basics of stocks and shares. If I wanted to start a company and I figured out that it's going to cost me £100 to start this company for everything I need to get it up and trading, but I don't have £100, well, I could go and borrow it from a bank and they would expect interest on that loan. They would expect me to pay them back £100 plus a bit more. That's fine. Or I could sell some shares in my business. I could sell shares at £1 each. I could sell 100 shares and people would be then investors and shareholders in that company. And you would hope that as my company grew and did well, the value of your £1 share would grow and that you would make money off the back of that. You've also talked about all the different ways in which those shares could be traded, different parts of the financial markets. Another big part that we talk about a lot is the bond market. And a bond is basically someone writing IOU on a piece of paper and you shake hands on it. I'm going to borrow from you and I'm going to expect that you'll pay me back and you'll pay me back plus a bit more down the line. And so all of these very kind of big, complicated financial instruments, actually, if you boil it down, we kind of see very similar ways of dealing with money in our own lives. We lend money to people, we trust they'll pay it back, we borrow a fiver from someone. Maybe you don't ask them for interest on that, but you could, now that you know a bit about it. So there are all sorts of different ways that money moves around the economy. And I don't think it's ever too early to start trying to think about trying to understand that.
My question is, how do equities and bonds work differently to accumulate wealth? And why would some opt for one over the other?
Well, now you're getting into the details of really particular parts of the financial services sector. Now, I am not an expert on what you call the equity markets, which is the shares in businesses that we just talked about. I'm certainly not an expert in the bond markets, but I do think that we can start to talk a little bit about how people behave in those markets. So here in London, for example, we have the London Stock Exchange, which is really one of the world's most important markets where people, could be individuals, could be big institutions, could be big funds that are looking after other people's money, will buy and sell shares in companies. And people will do that all the time, and it happens lightning fast. And people can make decisions about selling their shares in this company and buying some more shares in this company and trying to build what they might call a portfolio that will, over time, increase in value. And that's how people can perhaps save over the long term. Some people can make money quite quickly by being really smart or really fast in how they trade the shares in those businesses. And the bond market is a different kind of market. And that's actually one that a lot of governments are very active in, because governments, just like businesses and people, need to borrow money. And there's a big debate there about how much money governments should borrow, how much it costs them, and who exactly out there in the world is lending this money to governments, and why would they do it? Well, they would do it because they expect to be paid back over a very long time with interest. Interest is the most important part, really, of all the financial markets, some people would argue.
How do derivatives allow people to manage financial risk? And why are they at risk of becoming a menace if misused?
Gosh, I really hoped no one was going to ask me about derivatives today. They really are one of the more complicated parts of financial markets, as far as I'm concerned. But again, it's something that a lot of people understand well enough to make a living, make some money from. A derivative trade, unlike a trade in a share of a company, which you could say is a real thing, a derivative trade is people basically making a bet on something happening or not happening in the future. So I might sell shares in my company to you, and you might sell them to your friends or colleagues, and those real assets, if you like, pass around. And somebody else might come along and say, hang on a minute, Chancellor, I'm going to place a bet with you that the value of that share is going to go up over time, or might place a bet that it's going to go down over time, or it might not be placing a bet on the value of shares, it might be placing a bet on the price of something, coffee or copper or oil, all these real assets that are also part of the financial services system. So derivatives trade means placing a bet on something that might happen in the future. And if you find somebody willing to take that bet, one of you is going to make some money on it. But I suppose some people might say that the more complicated these trades get, and the further away from a real asset that they get, the higher the risk. And the entire financial system is based on risk. People spend their entire lives trying to balance risk, avoid risk, play a bit of risk, make some money off it. And sometimes this goes very wrong. And sometimes systems get too complicated. Sometimes people don't pay enough attention, and problems can build up. And that risk can build up to such an extent that something collapses. And that has happened in my lifetime. And it's almost certain to happen again in your lifetimes as well, because no system is perfect.
And so you mentioned about betting against and for stocks. So how do these like call and put options work, and where can you call and put option them?
Well, you're really getting into the nitty gritty now of the mechanics of trading. I mean, the City of London, let me take it back a bit. There has been trading of some sort in the City of London for 1,000 years. And a lot of the financial instruments that you started talking about can be traced back, all the way back, hundreds and hundreds of years, if not further, to markets, physical markets, people buying and selling goods, wheat, wool, and indeed, you could have a situation even hundreds of years ago. You would have had a market where somebody was placing bets on the future price of next year's harvest, etc. So you can trace the origins of some of the most complex financial systems today right the way back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, including in things like the insurance market, which really took off in the City of London. Now, you're talking about some of the particular mechanics of making trades when it comes to shares, equities. The system of how people do that has changed quite a lot, even in my lifetime. So 30 years ago, there were particular offices, particular jobs, particular people who all had a very, very particular role to play in how shares, bonds, and other assets were traded. And you had stockbrokers, and you had different messengers, and you had people running around, and people wearing different coloured jackets, and everyone knew what role they had to play. Huge changes since then. Nowadays, I can take out my phone from my pocket, and I can open one of 100 different apps that allow me to buy and sell shares in businesses or in many other markets, including riskier markets, much riskier markets, and indeed new markets like in cryptocurrencies, etc. So some people can do that on their own. They're called retail investors, individuals who are managing their own little portfolios, their own savings accounts, their own little pot of money. And then there will be other parts in the City of London and elsewhere, and indeed all over the world, that are huge, what's called institutional investors. So these are people that can manage sometimes trillions of pounds worth of money. And that is an awesome responsibility that they have. They could be looking after people's pensions, people's savings. So there are all sorts of different ways in which people interact with the market. But I think one of the good things about these days is that it's very easy to do it. Now, I do think you have to be 18 and over, but I think it's generally a good thing that the technology now exists for people to be able to trade in financial markets on their own.
How do banks use financial innovations to grow the economy, and how can the same products cause crises like in 2008?
Well, Prime Minister, that's a really good question, because at the heart of all of this, and the sort of financial institution that most people will interact with in most of their lives, are the banks. And I'm thinking of all the banks you see on the high street, and the banks where most people's money goes, and where most people's wages are paid, and their current accounts, and the banks that most people will use to borrow money to buy a house. These are what we call the high street banks. Now, they are innovating, is the word you use. They are looking for new ways to encourage people to put people's money with that bank. So they might say, look, you've got £10,000. If you put it in a savings account with that bank over there, they're only going to pay you this much interest. But if you put it in an account here, we are going to pay you this much more interest. And what's more, we'll give you £200 for moving your money into our account. Well, that's just one of the many examples of ways in which banks are trying to get customers to put their money with them. And then there will be different ways that they can help people at different stages of their life. So banks will say, well, if you're saving with us, it makes sense for you to get a mortgage with us, and we can help you buy a house, or we could give you a loan. So there are all sorts of ways that the high street banks in particular are trying to look after their customers and keep their customers' money in their banks. But banking is a really interesting part of the economy because it's also changed so much, even in the last 5 years, the last 2 years. what we call neobanks. Okay, so we're talking about a new wave of digital, online-only new banks that only exist on your phone, that are every bit as real as the ones you see on the high street. You go walk down there on a Saturday morning. And that's great because there's new competition. And if there's more competition in a sector, in this case banking, then it makes everybody stood up and try and be more attractive to win more customers. So the more competition there is in a sector, the more innovation there will be, the more new ideas there will be. You also asked about some of the risks that come with that. Banking is a very tightly regulated part of the economy, as you would expect. In fact, as you would all know, as Prime Minister, Business Secretary and Chancellor, financial regulation is a big debate. But mostly the banking sector is more regulated now than it was when I was your age. And a little after I was your age, there were some big problems in the banking sector. And there are new rules now to try and make sure that doesn't happen again.
Why does financial understanding protect individuals from scams? And what warning signs should children be taught to recognise?
So at City AM, we spend a lot of time thinking about financial literacy. And we do a lot of work with a number of different groups who specialise in working with young people to talk about financial literacy. And a big part of that will be about financial security and safety. And a big part of that will be about scams and fraud. Now, unfortunately, it's not just something you need to talk to young people about. Billions and billions of pounds, more money than we can imagine, every year goes to criminals, scammers, hackers, fraudsters. And one thing that stands out for me is when I read about or when we write about somebody who's lost thousands of pounds or lost their life savings to a scammer, these people feel so ashamed because they say, I'm not an idiot. You know, I work in financial services, or I thought I was smart, or I would never fall for a scam. And yet it happens. And that's because scammers and fraudsters can be very, very clever, and they can be, you know, very manipulative. So that's at the real kind of criminal end of things. But just as I was explaining how I think it's great that through technology and through certain apps on your devices, people a little bit older than you guys are now, but people can be much more plugged into financial mechanisms and financial opportunities. I think that's great. But alongside things like social media, it really does mean that there's a lot now of risk. You know, there's a huge amount of investment fraud and fake influencers and scammers and people who are trying to get you to sign up to this. And, you know, I know somebody from my own family who probably aged about 12 was convinced through an advert that they'd seen on their phone that they only had to pay a little bit of money and they'd be given a certain amount of cryptocurrency, which they could then trade. And this thing was going around the school and they were convinced. And I had to say, look, if something seems too good to be true, it is. And in this case, that's definitely far too good to be true. And so these things can take off like wildfire. And thousands of people can get the same messages, and people can think, well, that sounds great, and I'll do that. I'll give you my bank details, or I'll buy that. And, you know, if you're sending out that message to 100,000 people and just 2 or 3 people say yes, then you're in. So it's a really important part of thinking about money, your money, thinking about finance in particular, is being safe and understanding the security that is put in place. And I have to say, I think banks now are really good. You know, I can't take my phone out of my pocket and move some money around without about 6 times being asked, am I absolutely sure about this? And so I just think we need constant education, but not just for young people, as I said, because there's an awful lot of people who think they're old and smart and seen it all before, who do get into trouble.
Continuing on from why kids should learn about this, how do you think crypto scams like Amit Bhardwaj could still stay hidden and still make money?
Well, crypto is an area that a lot of people are interested in, and not quite all of them will understand it. And in any new market, in any new product, there will be opportunities for people to exploit the small amount of understanding that people have for something, combined with the large amount of enthusiasm or appetite they have for something. And if people are excited about something but they don't really understand it, that's an opportunity for someone to exploit it. So it's also true that financial regulators, what we call the watchdogs, are quite often late to the party. You know, quite often they don't start thinking about a problem until the problem has reared its head. And things move so fast in finance in particular, and particularly in crypto, that quite often the authorities, whether that's the police or the Serious Fraud Office or the financial watchdogs, have got to catch up and then try and make sure it doesn't happen again. So I'm not surprised, and we will continue to see scams, some of them really sophisticated and large, and some of them, really just kind of cheap and dirty. But there will always be those kind of scams, and anybody who's thinking about either for now or in the future what they want to do with their money, or what the opportunities are, or what kind of career they want to have, it's not too early to start thinking about making sure you understand those worlds. Not just understand the risk, because risk is a good thing, but understand the dangers of fraud, scams, because there are always going to be people out there who are trying to do that.
My next question is, what are your opinions on whether or not financial education should be compulsory in schools?
I think financial education should be absolutely compulsory in schools. I'm amazed that it isn't, and I know that there's a real patchwork of some schools that do it, some that do it well, some that don't do it. I think that there's some really good work being done to try and make it much more available to schools. We work with some of those charities and organisations here, and I know some of the banks in particular do really good work as well. And then there are some businesses like Go Henry and others which are specifically aimed at helping young people look after their money, and those are really important as well. So I think that financial literacy, financial education should be part of school, but not just school. I think it should be part of what you talk about at home. I think it shouldn't be a mystery. My kids are 5 and 8, and they've got little see-through money boxes, and they're quite obsessed about the number of pounds and pennies, and sometimes even a note that they can see in that. And my son will ask for something, and I'll say, well, you've got £6.50 over there. If you want that ice cream, you can pay for it. And he might go, actually, I don't want it that much. So he's already starting to think about not whittling down his £6.50. He's only 8 years old, and his sister's looks like she's got more money, because most of it's kind of notes from foreign countries that aren't worth very much in this country, but she doesn't know that. So I think something you can do at home. And if you think about it, when you're younger, when I was younger and my kids' age, what do they love to do? They like to play shops, constantly playing shops, and we've got little toy money, toy coins, toy card machines. So it can start there. It should absolutely be in schools. And then I think people will realise as they get a bit older and you go to college or university, you've got a bit more control over your finances, you'll be much better equipped to then go on in your careers.
And based on that, if every child was brought up financially literate, how could that change economies and societies in the next generation?
Well, I mean, if every child left school being financially literate, I suppose that would be fairly remarkable, because not every adult is financially literate. I mean, that's just a fact. And listen, it's, some people don't want to have to think about it more than they have to. As long as you can pay your bills and you understand and you don't get into debt and you're in control, that's really, for most people, the best you can ask and best most people are going to want to experience. But certainly, we would be better as a society. Our politics would probably be better if everybody understood, not just about their own money, but about the nation's finances, how the economy works. But of course, look, your business secretary, prime minister, chancellor, I'm sure you will have a view that if people had more of an understanding, more of an interest in how our whole economy works, that might change the way they think about politics. And indeed, politics might then have to change the way it works if people understand a little more, what's at stake. So the more education we have, the more conversation we have, the more we demystify all of the financial and economic ideas that we have to deal with, the better.
And how can online tools such as apps and AI be used to make financial education more interactive and customized for kids?
I'm sure there are all sorts of different ways that financial education can be taught to young people. I know that there's an awful lot of games designed around this, and I don't think there's any problem in starting quite young the idea of people looking after an imaginary pool of £1,000, and maybe by the end of the school term you've got to see whose decisions have led to that £1,000 going up or down. Lots of schools have these little investment clubs, and I think that those are really important and really useful things. So alongside that, you're absolutely going to have an explosion of new apps that help people either look after their real money or indeed imaginary money. I think these are, I think as long as these are being used in the right way, I think they're pretty cool. I think they're pretty sensible things as well. And you talk about AI, I mean, I can barely keep up with it, but that is one of the many things that is being changed right now is, of course, the way people access information, the way people search for information is changing, and a huge amount of what people search for will be financial advice. Where should I put this money? Who's got the best savings account? What should I do with this? What would make a good decision? And AI is going to be a big part of the way people, not just young people, but everybody, interacts with financial services in the future.
And how do banks decide who they should give loans to and who they shouldn't?
Good question. There might be time in your life when you want to ask the bank for some money. Might be a lot of money for a house, or it might not be such a huge amount of money. It might be for something else, some building work or a car. Banks will lend money for all sorts of things. Most of the cars you see driving around on the roads are not owned by the people driving them. People have taken a loan or a finance agreement to get that car. And most people living in a house they own will have a mortgage on that. So banks will lend money, but they will have decisions that they have to make as to whether you're a good bet. So, Prime Minister, you want to go to the bank and you want to borrow £10,000. And the bank will say, well, okay, let's have a look at this. So how much money do you earn? And you'll say, well, my salary is this. And they'll say, okay, it's interesting. But what are your commitments? Because I can see here you've already got to pay this much every month, for your mortgage. And you're already paying this much every month to get around. And you're paying this much every month, to the gym. So I'm going to add all this up and I'm going to say, doesn't look like you could afford to pay back this money. So sorry, not going to happen. Or they might say, yeah, this all looks fine. You can definitely afford it. There you go. There's your loan. And then, of course, that's a very small and silly example. Right at the top of that, you've got people who want to borrow, millions of pounds. And the same questions are asked. And you've got people who just want to borrow a couple £100 to get through to the next payday. And that's a really difficult position to be in. And not long ago, that was quite a Wild West market. People were being charged and taken advantage of to borrow quite small amounts of money. That still happens, but it's a slightly more regulated market. So you want to make sure when you're borrowing money that you can afford it, you can afford to pay it back, and not get into trouble, not get into debt.
How do money skills open doors to career opportunities in business, finance, or entrepreneurship?
Well, look, I think whatever kind of career people want to have, it's sensible to, be smart with money and to understand a bit about how the economy works and understand a bit about where your money goes and what you can do with it and what choices you've got. That's true whether you're going to be a doctor or a teacher or a lawyer or indeed a banker. Now, if you want to run your own business, if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to start something, then you really need to understand this stuff. Chances are, because when you're just starting out, it'll just be you. So you look at a big business today, they're going to have a chief financial officer and a chief product officer and a chief executive and a chief operations officer and a chief people officer and a chief marketing officer. If you're an entrepreneur and you're launching your own business, you're all of those things. So you've got to know enough to get you through how you're going to raise some money, how you're going to pay your bills, how you're going to invest this money, how you're going to borrow it, can you pay it back, is this business plan going to work, am I going to sell enough of these things? So if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you've really got to start understanding this stuff now. And luckily, there are lots of ways that you can do that, at home, at school, online. So yeah, the more you understand about this, the better it will be for whatever career you want to have, because not just about your job, but it's about financial security when you're older. I mean, I tell you this, I'm going to be 40 years old next year. And if I could talk to myself age 20, I would grab myself like this and I would say, start putting money in your pension. And when you're 20 years old, you're not thinking about a pension. Pension is for when you're old. I tell you, start putting money in your pension from the minute you start earning it. That's my financial advice for you.
And how does financial independence allow people to make their own decisions without depending on other people?
Financial independence. Well, I guess, for a lot of people, financial independence is the dream. And it will mean different things to different people. So for somebody will say to be financially independent will mean that I own my own house. I've paid off the mortgage. I own it. This is my house. No one can take it away from me. For as long as I live, this is what I've got. And then I just need enough to do what I want to do. And that could be financial independence. Some people, financial independence means I want to have, I want to build a big business, or I want to build, big income streams, and I want to make sure that every year I've got money coming in and it's always more than the money that goes out. That could be someone's definition of financial independence. Some people can feel financially independent just because they got a good job and they feel secure in it. So it'll mean different things to people, but it is certainly a very good thing to think about and to aspire to, because of course, what's the opposite of financial independence? It's not good, is it? So I think financial independence is something a lot of people start to think about maybe too late in life, and it's a bit like what I just said about a pension. If you decide age 16 that you want to be financially independent by the time you're 35, good stuff. Good luck. Now, shall I ask a couple of questions? Because I want to know a little bit more about Sir David Amess, UK Children's Parliament, and how you got your jobs. And I'd like to know what you would do if your jobs were real. So that's going to be my first question. And I'm going to start with the Prime Minister. Is if you were actually Prime Minister, even just for a day, have you thought about what you'd like to do with that power?
Obviously you could do a lot of good things, but I'm not sure. Probably I'd want to help with lots of charities, and within the day I would be the actual Prime Minister. I'd want to help with charities and organisations to help people, because even though you get to be the child Prime Minister, I feel like if you were the actual Prime Minister, of course you'd have a lot more influence, so you could definitely do a lot more good and a lot more help just with everyone around the world. I
think that's a good answer, because if you are Prime Minister, actually, it can take quite a long time to get things done in terms of changing policies. But just by being Prime Minister, you could turn up somewhere and bring a huge amount of support to a charity or an issue or a particular cause. What sort of charities or causes are important to you, Prime Minister?
Well, like global warming and helping animals, but also helping people who are less privileged than all of us and maybe who are in poverty, so we could help all of those. And even if it's just starting something within the one day, it can still make a lot of difference to them. Absolutely right. Good answer. Business Secretary, do you want to run your own business one day?
Possibly, yes.
Okay. Well, I think it would be good if this country had a business secretary who has run their own business, because it's not something we have at the moment. Okay. So have you thought about what being business secretary would be like? What would be important to you as business secretary?
I think it'd be cool to adapt businesses to what is currently going. For example, AI, the current technologies that is rising rapidly and improving rapidly, and how to adapt and make use of that.
Definitely. Huge responsibility for business secretary to try and help businesses adapt to new technology. And finally, Chancellor, you're in charge of our entire economy. Have you thought about what that would be like?
It would be overwhelming, but I don't think it would be too much to handle. The first things I would do is make the tax go down because it's a bit too much currently. And perhaps even though the tax is going down but the FTSE is still rising very rapidly and energy prices are increasing. So I would also perhaps provide aid for Ukraine and other places that need aid and distribute money equally.
All right. Well, I'll vote for you. I think I'd vote for all three of you. I think you've asked really important questions. I hope it's been interesting. I think it's been really interesting to meet you. So thank you very much for coming into City AM. And good luck with the rest of your time in office.
Thank you.